Hello, welcome.
Hello.
Wonderful to have you.
It's so nice to be here, and thank you for inviting me. And I'm told that there are more than 500 of you here from all around the country. So thank you for being here, even if I can't see you. Now, I am assuming that you're all here because you have some little bit of interest in either architecture, design, engineering, or some kind of related field. And if you don't, that's fine, but I hope maybe I can persuade you to have some little bit of interest. Now, there's just one message that I really want you all to take away from today. And that is that every single one of you can do whatever you want to do in your career if you really put your mind to it and you put the work in. Now, I left school at 16. I am not suggesting you do that. It was actually a really silly thing to do. But, you know, everyone has to discover in their own way what it is that they want to do. And at the age of 16, I went to art school. And it was really while I was there and reading about history of art that I discovered architecture. It honestly wasn't on my radar before that. I didn't know any architects. There was no family connection with architecture. It was something I discovered through reading. But what I began to understand, the more I read about it and the more that I looked at buildings, was that actually architecture, more than any other discipline, is literally about everything. It's about creativity, it's about culture, it's about science, engineering, society, sustainability, politics, economics. I mean, really everything. And that in ways that are both big and small, you can really make a difference and you can make the world a better place. So after a year at art school, having discovered architecture, I went to the Architectural Association in London, where I studied architecture for 5 years. Now, 5 years is a long time. And you know, I had a few moments where I had a kind of wobble and I wondered, is architecture really right for me? And after 3 years, I went to New York for a year where I was a waitress. But I realized during that year that I missed architecture hugely. So I came back to London and completed the last 2 years of my studies. And then when I graduated, after about 4 interviews, and it was really difficult to get in, I went to work for my architectural hero, Richard Rogers. He's designed some amazing buildings, including the Pompidou Centre in Paris and Lloyd's of London in London. And if you haven't seen them, I really urge you to look them up because they're very, very important buildings. And I loved my time there. I loved working for him. He became my mentor, my friend. But after 4.5 years, I left to start out on my own. First with my former partner, Jan Kaplitsky in Future Systems, and then since 2009 as ALA. And I'm going to now share my screen and just describe, you know, what we do and how we do it and why we do it. Now this is this photograph of shoes. This is my office. And we all take our shoes off. It's part of who we are. And in a way, this kind of messy pile of shoes is a metaphor, if you like, for the collaborative nature of architecture. We're a team of 40 people at ALA, all very different people, as you can see by our shoes. and from all parts of the world. But we share a passion for our work, and we're all committed to making a difference in however small a way. That is what drives us. And I want to show you how sometimes a project starts. So this looks like a very crude plasticine model. In fact, it is a very crude plasticine model, and it's almost kind of childlike in its simplicity, but it holds a lot of ideas. It was a research project we did called the Green Building in 1991, and we lifted the building off the ground so that the air that came into the building was above the pollution levels, so that the air was cleaner. And this aerodynamic shape of the building was about allowing the air to circulate naturally in order that we didn't need air conditioning. And from that model, we designed something really quite sophisticated. So, you know, from a very humble beginning of a little plasticine model can come something that is really technically quite advanced. And sometimes buildings start with a sketch. And this was a sketch for the media centre at Lord's Cricket Ground in London. Another building that actually that's raised above the ground, but this is for a different reason. It was so that all of the world's media, the TV, radio and journalists who are broadcasting the cricket matches at the ground, they can all see all of the boundaries. And this was a very innovative building. I mean, it was completed in 1999, but it still looks very fresh. It was quite groundbreaking in many ways, not least of which was that it was built not by building contractors, but by a boat builder. And this is the structure from inside, which is just the same structural techniques as they use to build boats. It was actually the first all aluminium building in the world, I think. But for most of our projects, we don't start with a sketch or a model. We start with a conversation. And the conversation that we had here amongst the 5 directors was, and this is a site in Lisbon. It's for a museum called MAT, the Museum of Art, Architecture and Technology. But the site, even though it's absolutely fabulous site on the river, the riverfront is completely cut off from the rest of the city of Lisbon by a railway track and a 4-line highway. So the conversation was, how can we use the design of this building to help connect the two? And so we argued that not only should we design the building, but before we design the building in a way, we should design a bridge that goes over the highway, over the railway tracks, because our argument was, unless you make it easy for people to get here, however beautiful the building is, it won't be a success. So we designed this bridge that would, where you land on the roof of the building. And the roof of the building is now as much a part of the kind of destination of the museum as the museum itself. It's like a kind of town square in the air, if you like. And it's very important to me that in every project we do, we think about how the public are going to use the space and how we can create public space for everyone, even if they're not going to the building itself. And this is a photograph that was taken on the opening weekend of the museum. And you can see what looks like kind of trees or something on top of the roof, but actually that's people. It was just teeming with people on the roof, on the riverfront. And when I saw this and I was there, and it was obviously a very exciting moment, I thought, yes, we have succeeded in what we set out to do. We have captured the public's imagination. And now the people can be on the roof and they can not just look over the river, that they can look back towards the old city of Lisbon. And you can see that it's next to a quite kind of industrial building that used to be the power station. And we wanted to make a building that really didn't pose any challenge to that building and kept as low as possible. So we could, you know, the building code allowed us to build higher, but very untypically for an architect, we built lower than we were allowed because of this idea of connecting the riverfront and the city. And it's a museum for big art. This is a Brazilian artist, Hector Gomoras, and it's a huge oval space. You can see people on the stairs, on the ramp, participating in the installation. So it's big spaces for big art. But then there are, as you go below the ground to the other exhibition spaces, because it's a museum of 3 disciplines, the space between the galleries, between the disciplines, is part of the experience as much as the galleries themselves. And here we've let the light in so that we're using natural light to animate the gallery space. And when you're at a certain point, you can look up and you can see the overhang of the roof and the tiles and the sky. So it's important to us, particularly when you're going below ground, that you have some connection. You understand what the weather is outside, you understand where you are geographically. And, you know, it was all about the waterfront and how we can make that part of the architecture. And we took these steps right down into the water, and at high tide the steps flood, and you can sit on the steps and just, you know, paddle your feet in the cool water. In the summer months it gets very, very hot. And we used ceramic tiles because ceramics is really important in important part of Lisbon's heritage. And we designed these tiles that would just pick up the different lights. Now, this is literally what happens at sunset. The building, it catches on fire. And then at dusk, it's a more kind of pewter colour. So it has a really different personality in different conditions. And there's this really lovely moment. And we hadn't actually designed this. It's something that we discovered afterwards, but next time we will design it. Is that if you stand at the top of the steps and you've got the overhang of the roof, which if you remember you could see from when you're down in the gallery below, because of the geometry, you can actually hear the sound of the waves from above, and it's a really beautiful moment. And there was another beautiful moment that we no way could we have imagined, when a group of musicians used the facade of the building as a musical instrument. Now coming back to the UK, this is the Victoria and Albert Museum in London, where we designed a completely new entrance, a completely new way of entering a museum. And we wanted to create a sense of informality, to just let people drift in off the street, to use this new courtyard, even if they weren't going to the museum itself. But it was a really hard thing to do because when we did the competition, it was a competition we won, fortunately. This is what was on the street, this stone facade, and you had no idea of what was behind. And so there were a lot of discussions and debates and arguments, if you like, with the heritage bodies of why we wanted to make changes to this historic screen. And we argued, rather like in Lisbon, that unless we make it easy for people to come here and just drift in off the street, we won't have succeeded. And so now this stone screen is repurposed, if you like, as a colonnade. And this is the courtyard, and it's just, you know, people use it in a different way. And it's interesting that Tristram Hunt, who's the director of the V&A, you know, the visitor numbers are up since there've been this new entrance. And he thinks that by making it less intimidating, less scary, it's encouraged new audiences to come to the museum. And that is so important. And what you see here is an oculus which looks down into the gallery space, which is below ground again. So you can see the structure of the gallery below, and you can see down into the void. And there's either a ramp or steps that take you, and the cafe we put in the area of sun. And this is where kind of old meets new. So we're inside the main body of the museum, and these beams and columns are literally, we've designed them, but they are literally supporting the weight of history above you. So they're supporting the existing old building. And the stairs that come down are animated by daylight. You have views of where you've come from. You feel very comfortable, even though you're descending below ground. And when you get to the bottom of the stairs, there's this kind of magic moment of there's more daylight than there was before. And this is the big gallery space, huge gallery space. And at the moment, there's a show of the Renaissance sculptor Donatello. If any of you are in London, I urge you to go and see it. It's a really, really beautiful show. And again, you know, using natural light to make a place come alive. And the engineering here was so crucial because we were spanning 38 meters. We worked with the engineers at Arup, and the relationship between engineering and architecture is really, really important. And you need to have huge kind of respect for the people that you work with. And this is actually from a very recent photograph from the courtyard, looking down through that roof light, and you can see one of Donatello's sculptures there. And it, you know, it feels very natural now. It feels very much part of the museum, but there's a kind of hidden complexity. And this is a drawing which describes all of the stuff that you can't see, the structure, the services, all of the things that make a building work are revealed in this technical drawing. So it's, you know, there are very many ways of describing architecture through drawings, whether it's sketches, models, technical, or renders. And this is how the museum courtyard is now used. It's just, things happen there. And it feels very different. It's a very different way of coming into a museum. And it's literally like the kind of life of the city comes into the museum, and the museum goes out onto the street. And this is where they turn the courtyard into a kind of disco for the evening. A very different scale. This is Southampton Hospital, and our site was a small, very small part of the car park, and it's for a Maggie's Cancer Centre. And we thought, you know, how can we create something beautiful here in the middle of a sea of concrete car park? So we had this idea that we want to kind of create an oasis of calm. And we wanted to imagine that there used to be a piece of the New Forest in this car park. And through this imaginary forest, we cut the building. And this is the building. So the landscape was incredibly important. We work a lot with landscape architects. The landscape architect here was Sarah Price. You know, again, the different consultants, different disciplines we work with, it's such an important part of being an architect and of designing. And what we wanted to create here was this really natural relationship between landscape and architecture, and make sure that wherever you are inside the building, you have a view of nature, because everybody knows that when you are surrounded by nature, you feel a greater sense of well-being, and people and their patients and their families are going through the experience of cancer, and it's important to have somewhere that makes you feel at ease. And the heart of the building is really the kitchen. You know, it's like the heart of the home is often the kitchen, and we put a roof light and this really soft light around the kind of kitchen table. And there are spaces where you can be private and spaces where you can be more with other people. And everywhere you are, you have this view of landscape, nature, planting, and you can't even see a tree, a car anymore. And we used ceramics again and glazed them so that it would really pick up the different lights. We and reflect all of the trees and the planting around, and you get this very nice relationship between architecture and nature. And we designed specially coloured glazes for the tiles for just this building that would match the kind of tonality of the landscape. And you can see the bark of the tree inspired the colour that we chose for the tiles. And this kind of watery stainless steel, where we need kind of private spaces, this kind of watery surface really picks up those reflections and the colours and the sun, and it kind of it sort of architecture melts into nature, and something magical happens when the sun hits it. And this is the last project I'll show you. Very, very different. This is literally, we're putting the sun in a box, because this is a project just outside of Oxford and Culham. It's a prototype for a fusion machine, and fusion is the process that powers the sun and the stars. And people have been, this is the holy grail of the future of energy, because if we can, and if scientists can crack how to create fusion, then we can have clean, abundant, low-cost energy for everyone forever. So it's a wonderful, you know, this is technology at its most optimistic, that it can save save the world. And we're using architecture here to message that technological optimism, because architecture as message it's a very powerful tool. And although it's, you know, nuclear fusion, nuclear because of the temperatures, there's no nuclear fallout. But as soon as you use the word nuclear, people are fearful. And so this is really about taking away the fear, and by making the building around the machine completely transparent, inviting people in, kind of metaphorically, and making the skin of the container very soft and beautiful, you take away the fear. And then inside is massively exciting. I mean, this is like the ultimate sliding doors moment, where you can see the fusion machine. Obviously, when the fusion machine is firing up, this is completely closed and the public would not be allowed there. But we're using natural ventilation to cool the machine as much as possible. We're letting the daylight in. We're creating a space that feels massively exciting for both the people who work there, but also for people who will visit. And this is one of the technical drawings. So, you know, there are so many different ways of drawing. There are so many different ways of describing architecture. But this is a technical drawing where you can see the machine right at the center. You can see the offices and the labs around it, arranged in a kind of concentric arrangement. And these offices and labs, wherever you are in this building, you have a view both of science to your left and nature to your right, so that there's this, you know, there is no contradiction between science and nature. And in a way, that's what we're trying to say with the design of this building. And my final slide is this, and it's to show you that architecture isn't all about drawing and designing. It's about communication. So we have, you know, 168,000 Zoom calls, and we haven't even finished designing this building. But we need a lot of Zoom calls because we're collaborating with scientists, with engineers, with so many different people. And when we're trying to do something that is a little bit different than what has been done before, maybe it takes more Zoom calls, because you need to build up that respect between people so that you can challenge each other and then arrive together at a beautiful solution. And, you know, 67,000 emails, it's not, and all of the bytes of data. So the project management of a project is equally important as the design. The way you communicate with people is as important. So I think that's enough from me. I hope that I have described to you why I love architecture. And now I want to hear from you. So thank you.
Wonderful, thank you. I'm sure everyone watching learned quite a lot, because I know that I certainly did, going through that presentation. And I love the idea of using the tiles and the glaze to catch the sun. I thought those photographs were so beautiful. So hopefully you inspired some of our young people too. We're getting lots of questions in, so I think you have. We'll go straight in with one of the questions that's just been submitted to us. And this has come from the Highlands School. And they have asked several, but we'll start with this one. And it's, how important is maths and science as a subject to become an architect?
Okay, now that's a super interesting question. And in a way, I'm the wrong person to ask it to, because when I was at art school and decided to go into architecture, I thought, oh, you know, I'm going to need a couple of A levels. So I'll do art because that's a doddle. I'm at art school. I can do that. And then I better do maths because that was what I thought you had to do. So I went to Isleworth Polytechnic to do night classes in applied mathematics. And I moderately enjoyed it. But when I went for my interview at the Architectural Association, I took my portfolio from art school, didn't have a single drawing of a building, not one. They told me on the spot that I had been accepted, and I said, but what about my maths? I haven't even taken the exam. They said, you don't need it. So I was lucky. I didn't need it. So, but it's a very, if you have an aptitude for maths or science, do it, because it's a very, very important part of architecture. But it's not essential. There are some schools of architecture which oblige you to have a science or maths A level, but not all of them do. So it's, you know, go with what your aptitude is. Don't go against the grain. If you're not very good at maths, choose something else.
Perfect. Thank you for answering that one. Our next one is a really interesting question, and it comes from Falmouth School. And they have asked, how did you design, or how did you develop your design philosophy, and has it changed over the course of your career?
Wow. That is a very good question. It's a very big question to ask, and the answer is absolutely yes. You know, as you mature, as you develop as an architect, as you come across more people, as you are exposed to more things, as you travel more, as you read more, and as you know, work with more people, yes, your ideas develop. And I think when we were at Future Systems, we had a very kind of, I would say, a very sort of recognizable style, for want of a better word. And now as ALA, we're more analytical, we're more driven by trying to understand, what it is that's going to make this project special, what it is that's going to unlock the potential, what it is that will excite people to want to be in this building, that will, they'll want to visit it or walk past it, what's going to really make the difference. So absolutely, yes. And I think at the point that you stop evolving and developing is the point you should step back. So I hope that we will go on evolving and developing.
Yeah, what a nice thing to think about life in general, I think, as well. Again, the questions are coming in rapidly, so I'm definitely loving this. Our next question comes from Nellie from Pendergast Vale School, and they have asked, how can architecture be useful in everyday life?
Well, you know what, it's very interesting. The questions you're asking are probably much more direct and interesting than I often get asked at lectures when I, am talking to an older generation, let's say. So architecture, if you design a building or a room that when you walk into it, you feel uplifted, you feel calm, there's beautiful light, it's generous spatially, you feel better about yourself. If you imagine you're in a classroom that has no windows, I mean, most classrooms do have windows, but I'm just using it as an example. It's really difficult to, I find it, if we have there's a meeting in someone else's office where there are no windows, I feel very claustrophobic, I can't focus so well, I don't think so well, I don't feel kind of liberated. It really affects your mood. And I think, that goes to the sort of heart of architecture, and maybe the heart of why I love architecture, is that, every move you make can make a difference. And it should make a difference. And some of the moves are tiny and some of them are much bigger. But yes, if I thought that we couldn't kind of make the everyday experience of living better through architecture, I think I'd be doing something else. And I think, having a kind of an understanding and a respect for the everyday, it's not just about the big moment. It's not just, and I think this is what's maybe behind your question and what is so clever about it. It's not just the big gallery or the big museum. It's about those little moments, when you enter a space, like at the Maggie's Cancer Centre, what do you feel? If you make people feel, then job done.
Wonderful, great. I'm definitely going to crack on because we're having so many come in. It's really wonderful. Some really great questions. So our next question of all the choices is, let's go for this one. This one's really lovely. This comes from a Year 7 class that has joined us. So these are probably some of the youngest group of students that are watching. And they have asked, what countries have you worked in as an architect?
Okay, so architecture is a very kind of international discipline, and we have people in our office from many different countries around the world, and we've worked in Thailand, we've worked in Lisbon, we're working in Brussels, We did something very small in America. We haven't really cracked North America yet. We're working obviously in the UK. We're doing a project in Paisley in Scotland. Really, you know, we work around the world, and that is fascinating because when you work in another country, you need to work with a local architect as well, who really understands the mechanics and the codes and things like that. Oh, we've worked in Australia, and that, you know, that adds a kind of, it brings a richness when you work with people from different cultures, different educational perspectives, or whether it's different, you know, materials that are local. We're doing a concert hall at the moment in Belgrade in Serbia. It's a extremely interesting part of the world on a really beautiful site, but it's not a region that before really I knew anything about. And so, you know, one of the great joys of being an architect is, and it's either, you know, working in a different country, but whenever you embark on a new project, and we've never done a concert hall before, we've doing this one in Serbia, you enter a new world. You know, you have to learn about a new discipline. You have to read around the subject to really get into it. And that's what's so fascinating. And every project is different. So it's so hard to kind of describe a day in the life of an architect because it's so unpredictable, and it's so diverse.
Wonderful. Thank you for answering that one. I love the idea where it's a job that you keep learning as you go through and you develop. You just constantly keep learning about different cultures and all sorts. It sounds really wonderful. Our next question comes from Jada from Prendergast Valley School, and they have asked, are there any negatives about studying and working in architecture?
Well, I would say it's not really a negative, but if you want an easy life, don't become an architect. It's tough, it's competitive, you have to work extremely hard, but I can't see that as being a negative. It's exciting, but you have to commit, and it is tough, and you know, you're always working to deadlines, and however organized you are, there are inevitably times where you have to work late, and then you have to get up really early and start all over again. But it's, you know, you're working as a team, and you spur each other on, and it's a very kind of, you need to create a very supportive culture in the office in order that people feel that they are valued and supported, even when you're asking a huge amount of them and you're asking them to do overtime. And people do, because they love what they do.
I like that. Some people who are really passionate about architect will go, that's not a negative at all, because that's the passion.
Yeah.
Where other people who are on the border might go, actually, that's not quite for me, which is really great. So thank you for being honest. We have two questions that have come in anonymously, and I'm going to sandwich them together because I think they'll work well together. So it's, do you have to be an expert at drawing to be an architect? And are rendering skills or computer-aided design skills useful for a portfolio while studying architecture at uni?
Okay, so it helps if you're good at drawing, but you don't absolutely have to be. And you know that drawing is different. There is drawing as in sketching, there is drawing as in technical drawings and computer aided, you know, CAD design. So very important, if you have access to that kind of thing, definitely put it in your portfolio. If you're kind of, if you're good at doing SketchUp or Photoshop or renders, yeah, experiment, because how you visualize a building is incredibly important. You don't just do a design and then say, well, we'll visualize it. It's an ongoing process, and the way that you visualize, whether it's through a sketch or something very conceptual or a model or a very sophisticated render, it speaks of a different aspect of that design. And we have people in the office who just specialize in renders and visuals, but everyone uses computers to draw, so that is a kind of prerequisite, but then you wouldn't be going into architecture if you didn't. However, you know, if you wanted to go into more the kind of project management side of architecture and all the kind of organizational things, you know, that's not so important, but you have to have a deep understanding of how things come together, how drawings come together, because remember that, you know, the drawings that you do, you hand over to a building contractor, and they're not trained like an architect. You know, they just look at a drawing and think, right, we're going to put this is where the bricks go, this is where the partition goes. I'm being simplistic to try and make a point, but you know, you've got to be able to communicate incredibly clearly to so many different people in order to persuade everyone to do their best work.
Wonderful. So we have time just for one last question before we end today's session. So we asked about the negative earlier, and we had a question come from the King's School, which is, what are the best bits about being an architect, to finish on?
Well, nice one to finish. I think it's the people you work with and the people you get to meet, whether they are the people who commission your buildings, whether it's a museum director, whether it's somebody who wants a house, whether it is an engineer that you're working with, a landscape architect, whether it's your own team. It's, you know, I have met people who I would never otherwise have met, people from such different backgrounds, such different walks of life, who have specialisms in things that, you know, I previously knew nothing about. And that is what is so fascinating and kind of keeps you on your toes.
Well, before we end today's session, do you have any final thoughts that you'd like to leave our young people with?
Well, I would just I just urge you to kind of think about if there's anything that I've talked about or that you've seen in my talk that kind of touches you, that you think is interesting. Go away, read more about it, talk to your teachers, talk to people, you know, reach out to people, reach out to my office. You know, we're super ready to talk to people, to host visits of students here. We love having young people in the building. Now, I don't, you know, but use your initiative. Do everything. If you are interested about something, the way you turn interest into a passion is work on it, explore, research, talk to people. That's my top tip.